This exercise is exclusively for Macintosh people. So if you're a Windows user, you can just go ahead and skip to the next exercise and we'll begin work on the color settings inside of Photoshop. Here's the deal though, for you Macintosh people, over time, Apple has sort of usurped some keyboard shortcuts that have long belonged to the Adobe family. And you really can't work inside the Creative Suite without these conflicting keyboard shortcuts getting in your way. So I'm going to tell you how to change those keyboard shortcuts so you don't lose anything. You'll still have keyboard shortcuts if you need them. They'll just be different. We're going to just be looking at some screenshots here inside of Photoshop as we walk our way through these options. What you're going to do is you're going to go to your Apple menu. Doesn't matter which application is in front. Go to the Apple menu and choose the System Preferences command. That'll bring up a dialog box with a bunch of different icons in it. You'll want to click on the one that says Keyboard, or it might say Keyboard and Mouse. So it depends on which version of OS X you have, but either Keyboard or Keyboard and Mouse. And then you should see this Keyboard tab come up first. And if you drop down, you'll see this first checkbox. It's named the strangest thing on earth, but it says use all F1, F2, etc. keys. It means the function keys as standard function keys, as opposed to having them change the volume and the brightness and that kind of stuff. When this option is selected, you press the function key now to use the special features printed on each key. I recommend you turn this checkbox on. It is off by default. Turn it on. But that does mean if you want to change the volume on your machine or the brightness on your screen or any of that stuff, you'll have to press the function key along with the F key, that is F1, F2, F3, etc., in order to make the function work. All right, but you'll be able to display palettes inside of Photoshop just by pressing an F key, which is actually a really great thing, and which I'm assuming as we work our way through the course. The next thing you want to do is you want to remap a few keyboard shortcuts. And to do that, you're going to have to click on the Keyboard Shortcuts tab here near the top of the dialog box. It looks different in Leopard and earlier than it does in Snow Leopard and later. So basically, Leopard was OS 10.5 and then Snow Leopard is OS 10.6. So if you have the most recent operating system, then things are going to look a little different than this. But let's assume just for a moment that you have an older operating system, Leopard or earlier. Then you would have to scroll down your list until you get to this item right there, Dock, Expose, and Dashboard. And you'll go ahead and twirl it open by clicking on a triangle to twirl it down so that you can expose this list of items that have to do with the dock, expose, and the dashboard. And then you would go to the keyboard shortcut, which is this guy right there, and you double click on it. So by default, I believe it's something like Command Option D. And everything shows up as little symbols. There's a Command key symbol. There's the Option key symbol. Incidentally, this caret means control. You don't have to type in the symbols in order to change the keyboard shortcut. You just press the keyboard combo on your keyboard. So you should be able to now press, after double clicking on whatever this was before, Control D at the same time, and then you'll get this keyboard shortcut. If that doesn't work, sometimes things are conflicting and things get in the way. You may find it helpful to close out of System Preferences, bring it back up, go back to this panel and try it again. Sometimes that works. But in a rare cases where you can't get a keyboard shortcut to work, it's because your Mac thinks it's doing something else. It's already occupied elsewhere. All right, then drop down here to All Windows, double click on it and change it from F9, which it is by default, to Control F9. So you press Control and the F9 key at the same time, and so on. Control F10, Control F11, Control F12. I made spaces, Control F8, but I don't use it. Spotlight. This thing really gets in the way of navigating inside of Photoshop. So it's basically Command Spacebar by default, and that is an old and wonderfully useful zooming technique across all of the Adobe applications. Even though the Spotlight thing does look like a magnifying glass, which is what the tool looks like inside of Photoshop, Apple's the one who stole this keyboard shortcut. So I say give it back to Adobe. And what that means is, in my case, I'm recommending you press Command Control F1 for the Spotlight search field, and to show the Spotlight window, you'd add Options. So Command Control Option F1. Up to you what you reassign, but that's what I suggest. Now, it works differently under Snow Leopard, as I was saying. Not all that different, but here's what the keyboard shortcuts panel looks like. It's divided into a bunch of groups like so. So you first start by going to Dashboard and Dock, and you set the dock hiding to Control D, and it's the same thing. You double click on this item right there on the keyboard shortcut, incidentally, not over here in the words, on the keyboard shortcut, and type in a new one. And for dashboard, I go with Control F12. The next group is expose and spaces, so you'd click here, you'd go ahead and twirl open expose if necessary, and you change your keyboard shortcuts to Control F9, Control F10, and Control F11. The next group is spotlight. You drop down a spotlight here. The other ones don't matter for our purposes. It's up to you. I turn on front row. I really like that function, but it has nothing to do with Photoshop. Drop down to spotlight and then change the spotlight keyboard shortcuts the same way I just directed a moment ago. So you double click. It's Command Control F1 to show the search field. It's Command Control Option F1 to show the window. And then our next guy is Universal Access. If it's turned on, you may have universal access working, you may not. If you do, you want to make sure that zoom in and zoom out are not set to anything that overlap what's happening in Photoshop. So what I recommend is for zoom out, this would be Command Control Option minus, and for zooming in, that would be Command Control Option plus, the equals key being the same as the plus key on the keyboard. And then finally, what I recommend, totally up to you on this one, is you switch down to application shortcuts and you go ahead and give yourself, this has nothing to do with Photoshop once again, but you give yourself a keyboard shortcut as long as you're here for system preferences so that you can open up system preferences from the keyboard because it's a very useful thing to do. And bear in mind, system preferences is where we are right now. And what you do is you click on this little plus sign right there. And that'll bring up this dialog box, and then you have to manually type in System Preferences. Make sure you type it exactly right. You have to type every letter correctly. And then either type ... so 3 periods in a row, that's got to be there, or you can use an ellipsis instead, and that's Option semicolon. Will get you the ellipsis symbol. And so that's 3 dots in a row. That's just one character. Either one's going to work for you. And then I made the keyboard shortcut Control F1. Now, I should say I had problems making this work at first. I couldn't get Control F1 to take. And so I had to close out and try it again. So sometimes that stuff happens. I didn't have to restart the machine or anything. I just had to relaunch system preferences. Also, for some reason, I couldn't get it to work inside of Photoshop. So if Photoshop was open, I couldn't get Control F1 to work. But if any other application was in the foreground, then the keyboard shortcut works fine. So these things are a little weird. But the good news is by remapping them, you won't have any conflicts with Photoshop, and you'll be able to work away inside Photoshop to great effect.